government grant. And then your corporate grant, which is the smallest slice of the pie, but is currently growing in influence. These are corporate foundations such as Walmart or other larger, I think Home Depot, things like that. They all have corporate giving programs. And these could also be giving in-kind contributions, sponsorships, matching gifts. So there's a lot more options for these types of corporate grants as well. They're often more community focused. So really looking where those companies operate, and they can be less bureaucratic than getting larger government funding. These are great for smaller scale or possibly some pilot projects. And we'll go into these in a little more depth when we talk about where to find grants at the end of the presentation. Okay, so just as a very high level, in general, researching, networking, writing, and packaging. And the networking, I would caveat with, sometimes this isn't possible. Obviously, for government grants, it's not going to be possible, but especially with the private foundations, when you are able to have that relationship building, that is really what they look for. And especially if you get a grant with them, it's the follow-up, it's making sure that, they see the good work that you're doing and they want to fund you in future years. Okay, so this is really the heart of the presentation. We're going to be going into each of these areas in depth over the next half hour or so. The big picture here is whether you're applying to a private foundation, corporate funder, most grant proposals follow a very similar structure with a few core components. That being said, as you all have probably experienced with a lot of government grants and maybe some nonprofit organization grants such as Creative West, we do have an application that is structured and is less of a free-form narrative. What we're going to talk about today is really more structured for when you're writing a proposal that is a free-form proposal. How are you going to structure that? How are you going to tell your story? And all of the things we're going to talk about do cross over into when you're writing this in an application as well. It's the same pieces. You're just going to put them, in the boxes that we give you, say, if you're applying on GoSmart for a grant. So this does cross over, but what we're going to talk about today is just writing a free-form proposal for any granting agency that doesn't necessarily have an application structure. So the executive summary, and again, we're going to be going into all this a lot more detail, but just high level to talk about this structure. This is your elevator pitch. It should be succinct, compelling, and clear. It should summarize who you are, what you're asking for, why it matters, and what results you expect. So this can be, a paragraph to a page, and we'll go over a lot of that in just a moment. The narrative. So this is really the heart of your proposal. This is where you're telling your story and providing context for the project. In government grants or grants with applications like ours, this often gets broken up into separate questions covering specific parts of your narrative. And within this, we're looking at your statement of need. This is why does the project matter? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Your project description. This is the how. How are you going to solve this problem? Being really specific. Your goals, outcomes, and objectives. We'll talk about this in more detail. Your evaluation methods. What are your very specific metrics to prove that this project was successful, that this funding went where it's supposed to go, and is having the impact that you are hoping that it had. And then your organization information. This is more than just background in your organization. This is, your track record, your key staff, why you're the right group for this project. So this is really showing that your organization is the right organization to solve this problem. And then your budget, we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail, but it should, in general, your budget should support the narrative. So there shouldn't be any red flags that are like, oh, they've talked about hiring 3 teaching artists and I only see 1 teaching artist in the budget. So it really needs to support your narrative, which is why I always suggest doing the narrative first and then following up with the budget to make sure everything aligns. And then last but not least, your support materials. And government grants might require very specific attachments. They're going to have very specific guidelines to follow. I'm going to say this many times throughout this presentation, so I apologize, but read the guidelines. If there are guidelines that are available, read them to the letter. You don't want to miss out on funding because you missed something small in what they were requesting in the guidelines. You forgot to attach something. Some folks will reach out, some won't. So again, this is just to help set you up for success. Okay. Me? Writing a compelling proposal. So, one of my adages when I talk about grant writing is a grant application, your proposal is a plan, not an idea. A strong proposal needs to outline a clear, actionable plan. It should have dates. It should have your artist, even if it's just proposed. We want to see in a perfect world, this is exactly what you want to do, not an idea of it. Funders want to see that you're ready to implement it and not still brainstorming. And with that, you're thinking about a business plan, not a thesis. I like this too, because I think as a grant writer, I tend to, maybe embellish things or put some flowery language around it, or, there might be a place for that. However, if you think about this from the panelist perspective or from the reviewer's perspective, they're reviewing dozens of applications, and they want to hear your plan directly and clearly, keeping it focused and practical. And with that, using an active voice, not a passive voice, kind of supporting what I've been saying, which is saying what you will do, not what you might do. For example, we will provide 20 or 30 after-school arts classes. Not if we get this funding, we would. That, you want to be so confident in this project. Let's see, using data to strengthen your case. We're going to talk a little bit about qualitative and quantitative data a little bit later, but backing up your claims with numbers is always a great practice. And of course, if you have them, but there are a lot of great resources out there to find some specific data, especially about the world of arts and culture. Incorporating stories and quotes. Again, data is your quantitative data, and then your stories and quotes are your qualitative data. So that's brief anecdotes, quotes from participants, testimonials that are going to highlight the human impact of your work, which is really the heart of what we're doing here. And I think of most arts programmings is really about that human impact and those stories. And then finally, ensuring a narrative flow. Your proposal should read like a well-organized story. Each section should logically lead into the next, creating a cohesive and compelling case. Okay. All right, so this is our first item of your grant proposal. Although this section is the first thing that the grant reviewer reads and the first thing I'm going to be talking about, it should actually be the last thing that you write. Because until you've completed all of the research and planning and developing your full proposal, you won't have a clear picture of what you're summarizing. This is your summary. A brief, compelling overview of the entire grant proposal, highlighting key elements like the problem, solution, and impact. I love this. Think of it as a movie trailer for your proposal, setting the tone and capturing the reader's attention. Oftentimes you might see this called the abstract as well, if you are, in other grant writing workshops. For the executive summary, I always talk about who, how much, and what for. That's top level. Your goal is to answer the funder's biggest question right away: why should we fund this? Think of it as giving them a reason to keep reading. This is your chance to hook their attention in a paragraph to one page. A strong executive summary briefly touches on who you are. So you're going to briefly introduce your organization, maybe just the mission statement, or one little blurb about your experience or your credibility, what you're asking for. So you're going to state the amount of funding right up front, what you're requesting, and what it will support. And then the problem you're addressing. Summarize the need or issue. And this is a summary. You're going to have paragraphs to discuss this a little further in the proposal, but in this summary, just a succinct summarization. And then briefly describe your solution, what you'll do and how, and then the expected impact. And again, all of these are fully broken out in the rest of the proposal, which is why it's really great to write the rest of it and then pull in those most important bits, put it in your executive summary. I hope this is not too hard to read, but this is a very, vague example for this fictional nonprofit. But right up front, who, how much, and what for. Arts in action, That's who. They're requesting $75,000 for a year-long in-school arts education program. It's got a date in there. It's got metrics serving 300 middle school students. So really nice and concise. Next up, we've got some quantitative data in here. Low-income students are 5 times less likely to have access to the arts, and it's cited according to the National Endowment for the Arts. So again, really brief, high level, but giving backup to your assertions right away. Same here, we've got the outcomes. All these outcomes have metrics. So they want to see a 20% increase. And then we say the program impact will be measured through all of these things. This is a pretty short executive summary, and you still have a lot of information packed in here. Okay, so next up is your narrative. So the narrative overall, we're going to break out a bunch of the different components within the narrative, but this is all kind of the overview of this entire section. So starting with the statement of need, this also can be called the problem statement or your needs assessment. This is the why of your proposal. Here, you are explaining the problem or community need that your project addresses. If possible, use data, research, and real-world examples to justify why your project is necessary. And I really like this. Why now? Why is it timely? Why this moment? I think that's something that's often left out of some proposals. So you want to include a clear description of the problem, being as specific as possible. And again, I'm going to be a broken record saying be specific, avoiding vague statements, defining who is affected, how, and to what extent. If you can use any data to back this up using local statistics, anything that you can get from a national agency or any academic studies to back up your claims, or any data that you've gathered internally from your organization, that's absolutely valid. And sometimes I think that's actually even better than using something from larger, regional or nationwide sources. This is your community. You know exactly who they are and what the problem is. So yeah, you want to, we're looking at this quantitative data. So only 12% of high school students in X county have access to. This is measurable numerical data that shows clear outcomes and trends. Using statistics, percentages, survey results, financial figures, any of that. That is really going to support the assertions that you're making about what this problem is. And then the human impact. This is your qualitative data. This is descriptive, non-numerical insights that provide depth and context. This can include personal stories, testimonials, anecdotes, and observations. As an example here, this is a quote from a teacher. Before this program, we didn't have any arts classes at all. When the students got a chance to express themselves, I saw a change in their confidence, their focus. And just because these aren't backed up by hard data doesn't mean that they are worth any less. I think that these are this qualitative data, especially in arts and culture, is so important to tell your story and to tell the story of the people that your programs are impacting. And then this whole section is, why this funder should care. So you want to talk about this need and how it aligns with their priorities. Again, this is a little bit more for, say, a private foundation grant where they have very specific stated priorities that they're funding. For government grants or for other grants that have very specific guidelines, you're obviously going to be asking for a project that fits in those guidelines. But when it is a private funder, you want to make the case for why this aligns with their priority areas as well. And I will say something in here is try to avoid making a square peg fit in a round hole when you see some of these grant applications. If you have a project and it maybe slightly aligns, but you want to tweak the project because you need the money, don't chase the money. Make sure that your project stays authentic and true to what you're trying to do and find the funders that align with that. Some common pitfalls to avoid in this section. Try not to make it too broad in the statement of need. If you are the example I have here, if you're trying to solve world hunger, for example, really bring it to your local community, bring it to the community you're serving specifically. And same thing if it's too generic. Make sure you're really using a local and specific community-oriented context to make your case stronger for who you're really serving with this program. Okay. Your project description and program plan. How are you going to do it? Activities and timeline, I think, is really important here and something that is often missed, including proposed dates if possible. A lot of grants have a very specific period of performance that you want to make sure you're showing that your project fits within. So my recommendation is, sometimes you're applying for these grants maybe even a year out for the actual project, especially with federal grants, that timeline is really long. So I believe the best practices are to put your best case scenario. If we get this funding, these are the proposed dates. For most grant programs, if some things change slightly, you can always talk to the funder, make adjustments there, but they want to see your fully fleshed out plan with as much detail as possible, even when it's so far out. If you have artists, I think one of the common things when we look at talking about your key personnel, or say your teaching artists you're bringing in, or other key personnel that are going to be part of the project and you don't know those this far out. Proposed artists are always great, or this is who we're proposing, they are not confirmed, or if you've done this project in the past, here are artists that have been part of this project in the past so they can kind of see where you're going with it. So you're going to be talking about your activities and timeline. There's a little example here, talking about your target audience and community impact. Again, if you can use any demographics and statistics to clarify those in your community that you actually serve. I've read so many grants where when they're talking about the community they're serving, they just give me the demographics of the entire city. And while it would be amazing if the entire city was part of every program, typically that's not the case. So if you can really just make it more specific and talk about those folks that you really touch with your programs. And then your key personnel, including titles, project responsibilities, and brief bios and qualifications. For your key personnel, it's always an option, depending on the funder requirements, putting resumes and bios in your support material so that doesn't have to bog down your narrative. So just some things to think about there. Okay, goals, objectives, and outcomes. This is biggie. This is technically part of your project plan, which we just talked about, but I really wanted to pull these out separately so we could talk more in depth about them. I know when I first started out in grant writing, these three seemed really similar, and I kept this on a Post-it on my computer to separate my goals, objectives, and outcomes. And I think it's really, this is really where you're making your case for the impact. So use each of these in depth. Make sure you're really hitting all of these. So your goals, your broad overarching vision of what the program aims to achieve. These are big picture, not necessarily measurable. This one helped me a lot. Goals are not necessarily measurable. That's going to be down in your objectives. So your goal, increase access to high quality arts education for underserved youth, high level. Next, your objectives, the specific measurable steps taken to achieve the goal. These should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Time-bound is great. That is your metric. So we're gonna see when you are achieving these. Enroll 100 students from low-income communities in a 12-month arts education program by the end of the grant period. And then your outcomes. This is your impact. The changes that will result from the program. And these ones, again, should be measurable as well. So the only thing you don't need to worry about having numbers associated with is your goals. Your outcomes. I think we need everyone to make sure they are muted. Thanks so much. So the example here is 85% of participants will demonstrate increased confidence in their creative abilities as measured by post-program surveys. Okay, next up, we're looking at evaluation. And this obviously ties into the objectives and outcomes we just talked about. So how are you going to know if you achieved those objectives and outcomes? Your evaluation plan. This is especially important in my experience in government grants. They really need to see how you are measuring your success, especially so that they can make sure that the public funds are supporting what they said they're going to support. So especially in government grants, really make sure your evaluation plan is very clear. Key components, your evaluation goals. What do you want to measure? Is it program effectiveness? Is it participant growth? Is it community impact? Is it, there's be really specific on the exact things that you're going to measure. How are you going to measure this? Methods and tools. Surveys, in my experience, surveys are a big part of it. Interviews, assessments, attendance records, even depending if you're doing a class. Again, your quantitative and qualitative data. Your timeline. When will the evaluation occur? Are you doing pre and post program surveys? Are you doing ongoing feedback collection? So just be really specific. Again, time bound. That's that SMART acronym, keeping it time bound. Who conducts the evaluation? Is it your staff? Is it your key personnel? Do you have external evaluators? And then how the results will be used. Always keep this one as your summation. So making sure that all of this work that you're doing, all this good work that you're doing to evaluate the program, is it being used to inform future programming? Maybe it's going to be used to help secure future funding. Is it going to be used for research for your organization? So how are you going to use these results? All right, this is a very, very brief example, but just to give you an idea of what this might look like. So this is we are evaluating using pre and post program surveys. What are we assessing? The student's skill development and confidence levels. The teaching artist, that's who's going to conduct it. And then here's what they're using: weekly progress assessments and feedback through focus groups and interviews. And then you've got your metrics here at the bottom. 80% of students completing the program, 75% demonstrating increased proficiency. And what I realized we are missing here is how these evaluations are going to be used in the future. So this is missing something. But just to give you an idea of what this might look like for your programs. All right. Next up, and I think this section is a little bit easier. This is your organization information and agency credibility. Certain applications, I think, especially government applications, might have this much higher up. You might be answering your mission statement and history up front at the top of the application. However, I recommend if you are writing a free-form proposal for a private funder, that you really focus on the project up front. You're going to say a little bit about your organization in that executive summary, and then the heart of the proposal is what is the project, who are you impacting, all of that. And then this comes as a follow-up. This is a more comprehensive look at who you are, your mission, history, programs. So this is demonstrating your ability to successfully manage the proposal that they just read, which is why it's kind of a nice follow-up to that section. Key elements to include: your mission statement. This one's obvious. History and background. When and why was your organization founded? What inspired its creation? Maybe a history of location, if that's changed over time. Talking about your programs and services. A detailed overview of your key initiatives, how they operate, and then including here, again, the specific needs that your programs address. When you talk about your communities and populations served, again, be specific. Who benefits from your program? Is it rural communities? Is it artists? Is it youth? And how many people you reach annually. If you have this data on your organization, it's really a great way to tell your story and to show your impact. Talking about your leadership, staff, and board here is appropriate. Talking about your key personnel, their expertise, how they specifically contribute to your organization and program success. Also here, I think it is great, especially for smaller nonprofits. If you don't have a lot of paid staff, maybe you're run by a volunteer board, maybe you have a really robust volunteer program, you should absolutely include information about volunteers here, and also any community partnerships. Your impact and accomplishments. If you have anything here that kind of shows measurable past success, this could be past awards, maybe other successful grant-funded projects, testimonials, any other recognition, maybe from other funders or from the community in general. And then talking about your finances and your grant management experience. Again, making sure that you're telling the story that you can successfully manage this grant. This here is a good place to discuss your annual budget, any other major funding sources, so you can show, this agency credibility, other funders trust us and we have successfully completed projects in the past, and past experience managing any other grants. Okay. Next up, everyone's favorite, the budget. So a lot of times there's going to be a form that you need to pre-fill, say for government applications, and you're going to have to make your budget fit in whatever their parameters are. But in general, whether you have that form or whether you're creating it yourself, the budget should be as detailed as possible. So instead of just saying, artist fees, breaking it down, which we'll see, I have a sample budget on the next page, but breaking that down into 5 teaching artists at $50 an hour for 7 hours a week, and just really being as specific as possible. Again, this is the grant proposal is a plan, not an idea. I'll see that reflected in the budget as well. So there's these are just some examples of what could possibly be included here. Personnel costs, that's your salaries, consultants, possibly fringe benefits if that grant accepts it. And I do want to note that especially for government grants, and as a best practice overall, that if you are charging personnel costs to a federal grant, you must keep documentation such as a personnel activity report, which we'll talk about on the next page. For arts grants, very common also supplies and materials. That's separate from equipment, and I would always make sure to, in the guidelines, check if permanent equipment is funded, and make sure that you're not requesting funds for any unallowable expenses. The difference between supplies and equipment is their shelf life, basically. So take a look at that. Travel expenses could be allowable. Marketing is a pretty standard one. Facility costs, this could be rentals, administrative costs and overhead. If it's allowed, this could also be called indirect, depending on the grant, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Okay, so this is actually a personnel activity report that I pulled from the National Endowment for the Arts, just to give you an idea. This is a time tracking document that's used to record how an employee allocates their working hours across different funding sources, projects, or responsibilities. It helps ensure transparency, accountability, and compliance with grant requirements, specifically here for federal grant requirements. This is going to verify the time spent on specific grant activities and ensure that personnel costs charged to a grant reflect accurately the work performed. So yeah, this particular one can be found on the NEA's website, but also you can use any version of this that tracks the hours, especially if you're charging to multiple grants. All right. So direct costs are what you're really the heart of what you're asking for. These are expenses that are specifically tied to the project and be clearly identified as necessary for implementation. Salaries for teaching artists, art supplies, we couldn't talk about this. Indirect costs. So these are general operational expenses that support the project, but are not tied to a single activity. Funders may have different policies on indirect costs or may not allow them at all. And some do allow them, but at a fixed percentage. For example, for federal grants, the de minimis percentage is currently capped at 15% of the modified total direct costs. And that's for organizations that don't have a negotiated indirect cost rate. But for a lot of private funders, indirect costs may not be allowed. So just take a look at this. And if they are allowed, I always recommend looking at this, at least giving, looking at this as possibly being part of your budget, because as we all know, it's very hard to come by general operating support. So if you can use this, I would recommend if they allow it. Okay, best practices for a strong budget. Clear, detailed, specific. I know I'm a broken record. Ensuring alignment with the project goals and activities. So really make sure that anything you say in the narrative is supported by the budget. The budget should actually be sort of a supporting documentation for the assertions that you've made in the narrative. Again, following guidelines, including justification. If you can write a brief narrative of the budget, I always recommend that. Not everyone, if you're filling out a form, they might not have that, but I have seen a lot of funders that have the budget and then have a text box where you can explain things about the budget. So take advantage of that, and really, explain why the expenses are necessary, or any more detailed breakdown that maybe you couldn't put in the budget. And then showing other sources of funding, of course, is going to demonstrate your sustainability and financial responsibility. And in addition, also check the guidelines and see if there's a matching requirement, and whether that's a cash match or an in-kind match, and make sure that that is in your budget, because that could absolutely result in disqualification if you're not showing the required match. All right, just a little sample budget. This is for, say, a $25,000 grant for this arts education project that we're talking about. So this description here, you can see, is really specifically broken down. There is some in-kind in here. Make sure when you're detailing out a cash budget, if something is in-kind, that is not in your cash budget. So that's zeroed out there, but also, helpful to have in here. And then down here, your administrative costs, and that's going to be some of these could be, this down here, this admin fee, that's an indirect cost line. Okay, we are almost to the end of this general overview. Last but not least is your appendices or your support material. These could be required. Again, check the funder guidelines, what they're asking for. If they don't ask for anything, use this as a way to support anything you can in your narrative. There might be some required things like your IRS letter, your board of directors list. But if there's some things that might not be required, but if you have letters of support or letters of commitment. So if you have 5 teaching artists that are confirmed, get those confirmation letters, even if it's an email, you've sent them the dates, they've said, yes, I'm in, put that in. That's gonna back up the assertions in your narrative. Again, you can put your resumes here for key staff or artists. Work samples, especially I know for arts organizations and arts grants, work samples or artistic material may be included here. And it's always great, again, to back up the assertions in your narrative. We're going to do pre and post surveys to follow up on student progress. Put a sample survey in here. On past panels, some panelists and reviewers have specific items that they always look for, and I've worked with a lot of panelists who really focus in on these evaluation metrics. And I've seen proposals sink or swim based on really strong backup documentation, which shows that you're really thinking about the entire project from start to finish. You're prepared, you're ready to do this. And then labeling, this depends on how you're submitting, but this is just kind of an administrative thing. But as someone who's gotten a lot of different grant submissions, and if someone emails and there's 10 attachments and none of them are labeled with the organization's name, and then they go into a folder, there's a higher likelihood that maybe not all those are going to stay together. So just if the funder asks for a specific naming convention, make sure you pay attention to that. And if not, I recommend always keeping your organization name in there and labeling them. So again, small administration things, but it can matter. Okay. We are almost to our Q&A. I see a lot of questions coming in the chat. Thank you so much. Common mistakes to avoid. I will go over these pretty quickly here so we can have plenty of time for our Q&A. Incomplete applications, again, just reviewing that everything is included in there. Lack of specificity. I think that's the last time I'll say it. Overcomplicating the proposal. And I think this is one that a lot of us do. I know I certainly do. Just try to keep it really clear and focused, simple, to the point. And it's not that you shouldn't tell your story, but making sure that you're really hitting the key points so that the panelists and reviewers' time is really spent understanding your impact. Not following the guidelines. So again, word count here is really important. A lot of guidelines will have specific word counts. Nowadays, I think if it's in an application, usually they have like a word counter that counts the words for you. But that's always why I recommend, even if you're doing an application that, say, is in GoSmart or some other grant application software, that you write your actual proposal and the answers to those questions using Word or any other word processing software first, and then copy and paste it in. Oh, this might seem like an easy one, but avoiding being repetitive. And I think this is more for those government grant applications or, for those applications that have specific questions. Some of them might seem repetitive. Some of them might seem like they're asking the exact same thing. And you're like, why am I being asked this a second time? Avoid the urge to just say the same thing you said in the last one and use every section that they give you as an opportunity to reveal new information, to tell your story better, to deepen the narrative. Maybe you're going to put some qualitative data in here, a story of impact. So just use every opportunity that you have to tell your story. Using unexplained jargon. This one is really interesting to me. I've read a lot of applications across a lot of different disciplines. And so often, I personally I am a performing artist. Theater is my my general discipline. And I read some of these visual arts applications or maybe, applications for a music program. And there are a lot of things that I don't know what those terms are and they're not explained. So I know we are all kind of in our silos sometimes, but really think about it from the perspective of someone who doesn't know you, doesn't know your organization, maybe doesn't even know a lot about your artistic medium, and then define some of those terms and give them a level of understanding. And on the same thing, assuming prior knowledge. And I think this sometimes happens a little bit more with local grants where, maybe we assume local folks are reviewing them and maybe, people think they know, or even knowing a city. I've read a lot of grants that say, oh, well, it's this city, which everyone knows about. And it's, we've had grants where people assume that those grant reviewers are, say, from Nevada, and they're from Massachusetts, and they don't know anything about our cities in Nevada. So, so just making sure to really think about it from the panelist perspective. Okay. Start early. This is a tough one, I know, for all of us that are at capacity and sometimes doing these as volunteers, but especially even because of that, give yourself the time to gather all these documents and edit. If you can get panel comments from previous applications or previous years, it's a great practice. The National Endowment for the Arts does provide panelist comments. You need to email them, and then they set up a phone call, and they verbal, in my experience, they've verbaled our feedback back to us, and we've used that in future proposals. So it's always follow up and see if that's an option. It's just really great. And again, with that, every panelist is different. I here at Creative West, we have a anti-bias training for our panelists, and we try to make sure that all the panelists are on the same page. But again, in the grand landscape of grants across the country, panelists may have opinions about. One panelist may think one thing about your proposal, and another one might be completely different. So while it is helpful to get panel comments from prior years, I wouldn't necessarily bank on that always. And I wouldn't necessarily change something in your application based on one panelist comment, I would say, but they are helpful to inform what you're doing. Leaving time to edit your application. With this one, this is actually my favorite piece of advice in this whole webinar. Let someone who is completely unfamiliar with your project read the narrative. Not someone on your board, not someone, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a friend, but someone who doesn't know the organization very well, and ask them, did they understand it? What did they remember? Was anything confusing? It's been really helpful for me in the past because, again, I think we all do get siloed. We are so devoted to the organization and our mission, and we understand it so deeply. And it's so helpful to have someone, a real third-party perspective on this. If you can, attend funder sessions about the grants. I know we offer them here at Creative West about all of our grants. A lot of arts councils offer these sessions. And then after submission, confirm receipts, ask if there's anything else you need to provide. And even that, it's just a follow-up email. You might not get an email back, but it's starting to build that relationship. And I think it's never a bad idea. And then my last best practice here is creating a grant document repository. This is going to save you time. So many of these grants, like we talked about in the support material, they're not going to ask for the same thing. They're going to want your IRS letter. They want your board list. Maybe they want your strategic plan. Keeping just a repository of resumes or bios for your key staff all in one place. Maybe it's a Google Drive that everyone can access. Maybe it's a physical, if that is your process. But so many times I feel like I'm reinventing the wheel, trying to pull all this material together from each separate grant proposal. And this is really going to be a time saver. It's a little bit of work on the front end, but once you have these documents, put them in a central location. And that's also great for succession. So for your organization, if there's a new development officer, if there's new board members, you can direct everyone to this one central location where everything lives. Speaking of, in that central location should also be your grant tracking system. This is, again, one of my top tips here. It's going to save you so much time. This should help manage your deadlines, submission statuses, budgets, reporting, one-stop shop. So if anyone has any question on any grant, you go to your grant tracking system and you have the answer. And again, I know especially with smaller nonprofits, there is turnover in staff and board. And so often I've worked with organizations who have missed deadlines and possibly missed funding altogether because of staff turnover, and there wasn't a central grant tracking system. So this typically, if you can get a grant management software system, amazing. For most of the organizations I've worked with, we just use a good old spreadsheet. You want to have the grant name and funder, deadlines, status tracking of the application, whether it's in draft, when it was submitted, put dates on all of this, not just that it was submitted, what was the date? Was it awarded? Was it declined? And this is especially helpful when you can go back, so you have a new person coming in and they can say, oh, we've applied to this grant for 5 years in the past and we got it for 3 of those 5 years, and go back and look at the notes and all of that. So this can really help you get that funding. Key contacts are great to have in here as well. Certainly you want your budget information and the reporting requirements. And with the reporting requirements, I also recommend as soon as you get a grant, you put it in as awarded in your grant tracking spreadsheet, and then you set a reminder in your calendar when that interim report is due. We, as part of our process here at Creative West, we send reminder emails, but most people don't. So I highly recommend putting those reminders for deadlines and follow-ups, whether you use Asana or whether it's just in your calendar or whatever that is for your organization, as part of your process as soon as the grant is awarded. And also in here, if you want to put in your notes and communication logs, it's always great to have everything in one place, again, especially if you are a small staff. These are just some spreadsheet examples of what I'm talking about. The one up top, you can see this is, you've got the organization, the opportunity, any note, the due date, who's working on this, status, and then your reporting. The one down at the bottom here, this is something a little closer to what I personally use, where there's tabs across the bottom, which is the prospective grants in a tab, then the grants that are submitted, grant maker response, and I'll submit. I have different tabs on mine, but again, there's a lot of really great templates for these just for free out there. So take a look and then tailor it to fit your organization. But yes, these are easy to put together, and especially with staff turnover, this is going to be a lifesaver. Okay. We're just going to talk about where to find grants, and then we'll open it up for questions. Government grants, these are a little easier to tell you where to find them. They're pretty much all in one place. Grants.gov is where you're going to look for all federal grants. The National Endowment for the Arts, obviously, this is our federal funding for artistic projects, education, and innovation in the arts. Your state grant portal, again, I'm assuming most of you on this call are probably very familiar with your state arts agency or your state arts council. And then finally, your city's Arts and Culture Commission or Cultural Affairs Office. Private foundation grants are a little harder to find. Really, the thing I recommend the most, that you can look at Instrumental, you can look at GrantStation. And again, I'm not selling any of these because these are all subscription-based. However, Candid and Foundation Directory Online, this is the gold standard for researching private foundations and funders, I believe. The great thing about FDO, which is again why I do recommend it, is because they do have free access available through many public libraries or nonprofit hubs or community organizations, which is great because I don't want to make you pay for something. You shouldn't be putting out money to try to get money. So check out, you can go to the Foundation Directory website and see where it's offered for free in your community. There also is, they do offer a free membership for some, I believe it is smaller nonprofits. Not sure what the budget requirement is, but that is something to take a look at as well. They do have that option. What I love to do on FDO is look up organizations that are similar to the organization I'm working with, see who funded them in the past, and then do a deep dive on that organization. You can see on FDO how much these funders have funded it, over the past year, what their areas of interest are, where they're funding. So it's a really robust resource, and for private grants, it is my recommendation. There's also Candid Learning by Foundation Center, which is free webinars, guides, and articles on how to write strong proposals, fundraising strategies. So it's a free resource that I also highly recommend. All right, and finally, finding your local and regional grants. Local arts agencies, a lot of local arts agencies have specific individual artist grants that maybe some government agencies are not able to do. Community foundations, looking again at your regional foundations, these usually have smaller grants. Nonprofit resource centers, checking out libraries that have, like I said, that have this Candid or Foundation Directory access. And then some chambers of commerce and business councils. That's just, another, it depends city to city, but it's another resource that I have seen. And last but not least, you can find grants by subscribing to Currents. This is our new newsletter from the Grants, Awards, and Programs team here at Creative West. It features the latest grants, awards, and creative opportunities from Creative West and beyond. And thank you, Marcelina. She just put in the chat, this is the link to directly sign up for this newsletter. This is where you're going to see all of our grant announcements, and we always try to put in some other opportunities beyond Creative West as well. And we always try to put in some resources here. I think last month we put in the a resource for finding data on arts and economic prosperity, which I think is such a great way to tell your story, especially to funders that are really looking for that financial boost for the community as well. So this is a great newsletter. Please take a look at it. Woo, okay. We are now in the questions portion. We've got about half an hour. I'm going to stop this share and let's see.
And Sierra, just really quick, I do have just a really important thing that Anika Tanay, our Grants, Awards, and Programs Director, put in the chat. Hello, everyone. Thank you for your questions around federal funding, i.e. NEA, Tour West, etc. We are waiting for information from the NEA. We will only be able to share more when we hear from our federal contacts. At this time, unfortunately, we have no new information. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And so our first question in the Q&A, I'll go through the Q&A first, then back through the chat. From Storm Marquise from California, what is your approach to private foundations accepting LOIs or applications on a, quote, rolling basis?
For those, yeah, go ahead.
And then they follow up with another question, so I'll go once you're.
Great. If it's on a rolling basis, sometimes when they're on a rolling basis, they also might note either on the website or if you request additional material, they might note it is on a rolling basis. However, we have a board meeting quarterly and here's our next board meeting. So I've seen that a lot. So you can like try to align it with some kind of deadline. If they don't give you any of that information, then you're just going to put in, I would always recommend at least 30 days before the start of your proposed project. For those, obviously, if it's an LOI, you're going to want to bring that deadline out even further. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
And then the follow-up is, if the proposal does not ask for specifics for history of grant management / fulfillment, should we include it somewhere anyway?
It depends. on how specific the guidelines are. If they give you 10 questions and that's what they want you to answer, 100% stick to those 10 questions. If they say, these are the things we'd like you to include, and it's a little bit more vague, then I would absolutely include specifics about your mission and history, again, within whatever their allotted word count or page count or whatever that is.
Wonderful. And then in the chat, Sierra from Washington. My biggest hurdle is connecting our more pop entertainment offerings with funding opportunities. We still need support for these programs, and they are important, but they don't tend to connect strongly with the grantors in the way our more mission-driven programming does.
So can you clarify what the question is there?
I think with the question, and then Sierra Hutton from Washington, if you can pop on and just clarify, if I'm incorrect, that they still need support for the programs, but how do they kind of make the argument that these are important, even though they don't seem to connect?
Okay, I'm looking at the
Oh,
question.
I believe this was in response to the original poll questions at the beginning.
Ah, yes, that makes sense. So not a question.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Perfect. Yes, thank you.
Let's just see. From Sammy, are the executive summary goals / strategies aligned with a strategy for a cover letter to a foundation?
That's a really good question. The cover letter, I did not cover, I did not cover the cover letter in this. Yes, I think that using that layout for the executive summary with how you're gonna, who, how much, what for, absolutely transfers over to a cover letter. Yeah, and I think if you are doing a cover letter and then moving into your whole proposal, just being judicious about maybe even in the cover letter, just one line, who, how much, and what for, then you're going to get into your full executive summary on the next page, your narrative after that. So yes, I think it's the same thing where I'm saying write the executive summary last. So you're going to write your executive summary, and then you're going to even further distill that to put it into the way higher level cover letter, if that makes sense.
Sierra from Washington. For the Q&A section, can you talk a little bit about strategies for grants for capital campaigns?
Oof, that is a big question. Grants for capital campaigns, I would say, in my experience, are few and far between. The vast majority of capital campaigns that I have worked on are, 70 to 90% private funders, private foundations, private donors. That being said, there are some grants for capital campaigns. Strategy wise, I think I'm gonna hold on the rest of this because I think it's a much larger question than I can answer in this Q&A section, because I do think that if it's a grant for a capital campaign and they allow capital expenses, they're going to be really clear in their guidelines about what exactly they're asking for. So I think my best advice is for those grants, follow exactly to the letter what they're looking for. And please feel free to email me, and we can maybe have a little bit more of an in-depth discussion about that.
Jennifer Nelson. Does your staff know the best way to find a grant intern? Maybe someone that is or studied grant writing in college?
I don't know that I have a great answer for this. Ashanti or Marcelina, do you have any insight on interns in this world?
I would highly suggest, so if you're looking at somewhere like Colorado, where I'm located, we have something called Colorado Nonprofit, and it's coloradononprofit.org, I believe is what it is. So if your state has something like that, like Nevada nonprofit.org or something where they have kind of like a database, that is where a lot of the time, so Colorado Nonprofit will often put in there, like, what jobs are available. I'm looking for an intern who, the specificity is what you're going to pay, all those kinds of things. I would say, though, as just like a general rule of thumb, that grant writers aren't necessarily interns. It's a lot of the time why a lot of smaller organizations, it's kind of left to whoever's in charge to write those grants, as grant writing is a very highly coveted and very specific skill, and it does not come at what you would think is like an intern salary. And it would just be very hard, if we're going to be direct, to find an intern for a grant writing program. If you're able to post it and doing something like that on your organization's nonprofit websites, that would be great, but that is something that I would highly recommend. But just, for full transparency, it would be hard to find a grant writing intern.
Thank you, Lena.
I would say if you are thinking about colleges, like someone had mentioned in the chat, Sierra had mentioned in the chat that it's not necessarily part of most curriculums in college. However, English majors, or maybe a major that is that has a background in that particular field might be helpful. But again, the best recommendation is similar to what Lena had mentioned, reaching out to your state to see. Most states will have some kind of grant department.
A few more questions in the chat. From Karen, where does promoting the activity fit?
Great. I'm assuming we're talking about budget here, but please correct me if I'm wrong. Marketing and promotion is a really standard line item that I see for a lot of grant applications, proposals. So I think that's absolutely a direct cost. I put it in most of the grants I write. It also, I think telling that story about promotion and marketing as more of an outreach and community story as well. So it's not necessarily just about sending out an email. It's about how do we reach those communities, which is 100% an important project cost.
Jordan Jones from Washington. How can one make the case that though you currently have a small operating budget, you can successfully manage a larger grant? I am thinking specifically of grants that require a minimum operating budget.
That's a really good question. And we actually just have been working with the other regional arts organizations on a wonderful pilot program called Arts Here, where we have worked with organizations of all sizes, but a lot of smaller organizations with a very large capacity building grant. And to your point, it is a pilot program because that isn't done a lot. And we are really working towards this trust-based grant making. And in programs like this, I'm hoping more of these programs catch on, so you don't have to ask this question, because just because you're a smaller organization with a smaller operating budget, that you automatically should be disqualified from these larger grants. So with that preface, I will say the best way to tell this story, if you can't tell it financially, is to tell it with the human impact. So again, talking about your staff, talking about those key personnel. What is their background? Tell us other successful projects that you have managed and completed successfully. Even if those are a lower dollar number, the fact that you've successfully completed other similar projects, I think is going to hold weight.
Inez Garcia. I'm an individual artist and wear a bunch of hats. What's the best way to become more efficient when writing grants?
That's a good question. And I think I would say, what I was talking about too with the your grant tracking system, your grant document repository, so that you can just have a go-to place for these. And what I might say also, and it could go either way with this piece of advice. There is a tool that some folks use. I think it should be used judiciously. I have used it judiciously in the past, but using AI as a helper, as a tool, as a starting point, especially when you are a small organization and you are still telling your authentic story and it's still your voice and all of those things. But it's not something that I would immediately, if I'm reading a grant application, I'm not thinking, oh, this was written by AI. But I think, again, if you are not a full-time staff member, paid development director, it's a tool that you can use for more efficient grant writing.
Yeah, I've used it in the past to kind of like move different pieces, like just to help the flow of the writing better. But I've found that like as far as content goes, like AI usually takes like the most generic of everything that they find on the internet that applies to your whatever you're asking, and then kind of like if you and then that's what they add in. But I guess it's helpful I found it helpful for writing flow. But
Yeah.
definitely not great for content.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100%. And you know, Grammarly, things like this, like any of those tools, it is something I recommend, again, using it with you know, judiciously and making sure that you are still the main voice. But again, you know, it's tools that are out there though, and that's really what I recommend is just taking advantage of the things that are out there. Yeah, I know, Marcelina or Ashanti, do you have anything else on this?
I like AI to a point. I think that if you at least start with a strong foundation, as someone who's been a reviewer multiple times, it doesn't really, you can't really tell as long as you're editing and really putting into the heart of your application. Really, what I'm looking for when I am doing something like reviewing a grant or I'm on a panel, I'm really looking for like, are you showing me statistical data? Are you actually helping the communities that you say you're helping, or is it just a pipe dream? Like there's just like a lot of things, obviously going with whatever rules that they set for us on the panel. But if I'm able to kind of like have a little bit more wiggle room with how I look at your application, I'm just looking that you're doing what you actually say that you're doing and moving from there. And just flowery language isn't all that helpful. It actually, like when you are reviewing and paneling like 100+ applications, a flowery language after a little while just gets a little much. And so that's when like the data is super helpful. But Ashanti, you've been on more panels than me. I'm sure you have much more insight.
Thanks, Lena. Thanks, Marcelina. I would say the good old boilerplate. So having a template with, I'd say just dump all of the information that you have on one sheet. Most of the questions that, a lot of the general questions that you'll have, and that can also be a template to where you can also tailor questions for specific different grant opportunities so that you just have this very accessible one sheet, or sorry, not necessarily a one sheet, but just a document that has all of your information, contact information. It's a good way to update and kind of change different things as time progresses. So yeah, I highly recommend the boilerplate.
Great. Thanks, team.
Brenda Francis, when there is no deadline, how do you motivate yourself to write the grant?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I currently have an entire list of grant opportunities on my personal grant tracking spreadsheet for another organization I work with. And what we have done, and again, this is just for this small nonprofit that I work with here, is listed out all of our upcoming projects and when those start, and then prioritized with our board and staff capacity which projects align with which funders, and that has enabled us to set a timeline. So for example, there is an arts education grant, or a foundation that specializes in arts, funding arts education. We have our summer camps coming up, so we prioritized that, and I knew that we needed to apply for it 60 days out from the program, and I kind of set myself a deadline, and I put that with an asterisk in my spreadsheet, and that was my first priority. So really, again, making sure you're aligning your project to the funder's priorities. And then that project usually has a start date, and that's a good place to go on.
Bill Arnold, what is the name of the grant writing software which was referenced?
Grant writing software. I am not sure. I'd reference grant writing software.
I thought you referenced some sort of software, either grant management or grant writing software early in the presentation.
And Bill will also be sending out the recording and the slides, and so it'll be on there as well.
Yeah, I can think about it. I think I had certainly mentioned, you know, Foundation Directory, which is a great place to find grants, Candid and Foundation Directory. But let me think about that, and I can throw that in the chat if it comes back to me. Sorry about that.
Sorry to interrupt. I think it was like Oahu. And I had never heard of that. Oahu or Oahu or something.
Oh, is it
like
Asana?
Asana. That's what it was.
Okay.
Is that with
yeah,
an
sorry
A?
about that. Yeah, it's Asana is it's like a task management system. We use it here at Creative West. It's not grant specific, but it's a really robust platform that allows you to, you know, make tasks and put reminders and color code things and put them in projects. So in general, it's a great tool for nonprofits across the board.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ginger.
Storm Marquise from California. What are your tips for applications with questions that ask for multiple pieces of information, but only give a very limited word count? Example, ask for detailed description of population served and how these groups find our organization and how we connect for programming, but only 50 words allowed.
Oh yeah, I've written a lot of these. In these, I use bullet points for these. I take out as many unnecessary words as possible. So yeah, I think that's my best advice for these is just giving the facts. And we try really hard in our grants to give the appropriate word count, because I know it can feel really difficult when they're asking for all this information in one section. So I would say that, and again, maybe just focus on the most important. So for this, the population that you are impacting the most. So instead of, this group and this group and this group, if you have a limited word count, give us the most important, the most impactful one, the one that tells your story the best.
With regards to your suggestion about bullet points, do you ever find that a certain type of bullet point, like a dash versus a point itself, might affect the portal that you're in? It might reject it or cause any other certain problems. So what do you think is the best format?
I love this very specific admin question because I know exactly what you're talking about. Some, I will say, like, I've worked with Submittable. Submittable has full, capabilities. So you can put bullet points, you can use bold, you can use italics. It's a really, the platform gives you a lot more freedom to do those types of things. Whereas other platforms, you can't use a bullet point at all. It'll turn into a weird symbol and mess you up. So the dash is usually what I go to there. And I've used that often in grant applications.
Thank you.
Andrea Murr. I'm an artist from Guam and we have limited funding here. Where can we find other grants for artists and/or artist community projects?
Oh, that is a great question. And thank you for being here from Guam. And, we are working on creating some networks with our Pacific jurisdictions and also making sure that we are looking at funding opportunities for our Pacific jurisdictions. I'm not sure if that's something Ashanti would be able to speak a little bit more to.
Oh, goodness. Well, if you're going to be here later, in a few hours, we're actually having our Pacific Jurisdictions Programs meeting. And I will send you an email, or if you can send your email, I can reach out and provide more information about those opportunities, because we definitely want to help where we can.
Great, thank you so much.
And just as an FYI, we do have about 10 minutes left. And so we are going to try to get as many questions answered as possible. Anything will be most likely followed up in an FAQ format along with this presentation. But apologies to everyone who isn't getting their question answered today. Hopefully you'll be able to answer it within the week. Kyoko Yoshida, what are some good examples to build networks/relationships with funders?
This can be tough, and quite honestly, this is not necessarily my personal specialty, because a lot of this goes into more of the development side with building individual relationships with donors. I think there's a lot of crossover there, but my best advice for that, especially for grants, there are a lot of private foundations that do not have request that you don't contact them or their board members, so make sure to look at that in advance. But for those that are open to that, a great starting point is looking at their board and seeing if anyone in your organization already has a contact or knows someone that knows someone who can open that door for you. And then barring that, if they do have contact information on their website, I think a great starting point, if you don't have a personal contact, is emailing them just to ask if there's any other information you can get about the grant. this, introduce yourself, introduce your organization. I'm really interested in this grant. We work in arts education. I see that that's one of your funding priorities. I'd love to get some more information. That's a great intro. You're asking for something, and that's just starting a relationship. And then maybe they email back, and then you can, then you can go from there. So I think that an initial email talking about the alignment with their priorities is always a great first step.
Sorry, I lost my place for just a second.
Oh, wait, I'll finish that with saying this, it's a little bit harder to open the door if you haven't had any connection with them at first, which is why that part is a little trickier. However, the building the network and relationship with them that I think I was discussing in the presentation is more about after you are funded, tell them about the project, send them pictures, show them what their funding is doing. Obviously, there's the required reports, invite them to your space, all of those things, have them come to a class and see, this arts education program in action. So that's that relationship building that I'm talking about, so that they can see where their funding is going in this project, and then they will want to continue funding your good work.
Sierra from Washington. Do you have strategies for submitting for the same grant year over year for very similar programs? We do a kid series every year that changes in specifics, but not in overall structure, and receive many of the same grants every year, and it can start to feel pretty boilerplate. Is that an issue?
It's a really good question, and I've also been in this position before. I think number one thing to remember is that typically, especially for, say, your state arts agency grants, or say you're applying for the same arts education program year over year, typically that's not going to be the same panelists year over year. And that's something you want to think about too when you're writing your application, is it's going to be a new person reviewing this every year. So that boilerplate might not necessarily be an issue. However, what I would recommend is looking at your evaluation and those metrics. So saying, we've run this program for 10 years. We did this survey last year, and this is what we learned from the survey. And here's how we implemented those changes this year. And even if they're small, it's showing that your evaluations are important, and that you are using that data. And it's showing that you are looking at continually improving the program, or if not necessarily improving it, maximizing the impact. So I think that's the best story to tell for these long running programs.
Calder Kamen. I just moved to the Kansas City, Missouri region from Texas. In Austin, there are grants and foundation centers where you could book time to review giving foundations and their taxes / giving. Is there a list or map of these research centers? Trying to find one in my new region. Do you know how?
I'm not certain what this particular foundation center is, but I would bet, so I know that there are some, like here in Nevada, I know that there are some organizations where, again, you can access like Foundation Directory for free, and they, so I would start by looking at Foundation Directory, because I know they have partnerships with a lot of these types of centers that I think you're talking about. But beyond that, I'm not sure. And if there is a map of these places, I would love to know about it.
There's a couple of questions I am skipping because Sierra did already answer those questions. If you have a follow-up, please do email us. How should you respond to rejection emails that come from a real person, not just an automated copy-paste?
Oh, definitely respond. This is, again, goes back to that relationship building, right? And use it as an opportunity to tell more of your story. Respond and say, oh, thank you so much. We're also doing X, Y, and Z programs. If you are in the area, we'd love to welcome you in, whatever that is. And even if they're not going to show up, you've taken another opportunity to show them more of what you're doing and your programs and your impact. So yes, I would absolutely respond to those. And even if it's a copy paste, if it's from a real email address, respond to that too. Because it might get to someone's inbox, and then maybe they'll remember you next time.
And then for our last question, do you have any tips specific to individual artists applying to grants?
Yeah, I think for individual artists, in my experience in reviewing grants for individual artists is that it's so much more about you as a person, what you're authentically bringing to the work, and just being so true to yourself and not trying to fit yourself into a box to fit the grant, and being like just really telling, again, I say this a lot, but telling your story and telling your story of why what you're doing, again, why the art that you're creating matters to you, to your community, to a larger audience, whatever that is. And I think all of those are valid. I've worked on a lot of grants that for individual artists, they've had to be project-based, but I've also worked on individual artist grants that are just for the creation of work. And I love those because it's saying your art doesn't necessarily have to have, you know, some big public component to be worthy of funding. So I think that's something to keep in mind, that and looking for those grant opportunities, that you don't necessarily need to be public facing. So yeah, I hope that helps. And I've got just one more slide here if we're gonna be done with the perfect. Thank you. Oh, there we go. Lena, is that you? Perfect. All right, so we've got 2 more of these capacity building webinars coming up, one on May 21st and one on August 13th. And we'll put in the chat the website where you can go to sign up for all of these. And next slide, please. Closing and final tips. Grant writing is a process. And especially this year, I would say with, you know, everything that is going on, it is going to be an ever evolving landscape. So being patient, staying persistent, and keep trying to learn from each experience. And my biggest tip, celebrate success. If you get the grant, celebrate it. It's always exciting every time. And then follow up with your funders to keep that positive relationship. So I wish you all the best of luck. You can reach me at, my email is up on the Creative West website. I can also put it in the chat, and I'm available to answer your questions. So please feel free to reach out anytime. We are here to help, not just with our own grants, but also for grants in general. So thank you so much for being here today. And hopefully some of you can attend our upcoming capacity building workshops as well. Thanks all.